Well, hi, Mimi. I see you have a
Belinda.
friend.
I do. I brought my friend Mark Hauser to come and talk with everybody as well for a few minutes because Mark and I have been talking about poetry out here in the wilderness in Oregon. And there have been some others who have been learning about poetry with me. And I just thought it was an exciting thing to, first of all, for me to be able to share poetry with people who haven't studied poetry in any way and talk about it and present different poetry books, different types of poetry that we might be reading, and talk about what does it mean to like a poem, what is in our own hearts, how do we get that out to the page. And so, yeah, Mark and Mark's wife also, and Mark's daughter have all been working with me, learning about poetry out here in the desert. Mark, do you want to say anything about your experience so far with learning poetry?
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
sure. I spent most of my career in media as a play-by-play sportscaster, radio talk show host, things like that, a news director. So when you work in those fields, your first draft is your only draft. Once it comes out of your mouth, it's never coming back. And what I'm enjoying about learning about poetry is I can write something, come back 2, 3 days later, a week later, rework it, find new words, find different phrasings, and it's fun. It's fun, and I love the fact it's called free verse because it's very freeing writing something like what I'm trying to do as opposed to writing a news story or a sports story. So it's been fun and I've learned a lot. So, and Mimi's an excellent teacher. So
One of the things that I wanted to share with people out here in the wilderness in Oregon is that poetry is fun and it's fun to read and fun to write. And so many of us, no matter where we live, might feel a little bit like it's above us or we didn't go to school to learn it and therefore we can't understand it. When in fact, it's very accessible. In fact, for me, it's the people's language. So being able to share that with you, Mark,
yeah.
and the people who have come to our poetry sessions in the wilderness has just been a really, first of all, it's been a great time, and a wonderful experience to share poetry
Hmm.
with folks who haven't had the experience of writing or reading much poetry. So that's what we've been up to here in the wilderness. And I want to say that it does make me feel a lot of gratitude for the woman who runs the National Beat Poetry Foundation. Um, and maybe I don't know, Belinda, if you could put Debbie's full name and perhaps her info up, but it's an honor being one of her Beat Poet Laureates because we go into communities and share what we love. And what we love is discussing poetry, learning how to write it, learning how to play with it, learning how to completely redirect our thoughts to the page. And yeah.
All right.
Right. Well,
Here, we'll try to get this.
this one's called an unwanted guest. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. All right. I'll do this and leave y'all alone. Yeah. In a city famous for gloomy gray and rain, he was born with the burden of being sunshine. Through a childhood dodging raining blows from a father who found less courage in and more anger from a bottle, he found a sunny courage his dad could not. Drafted into a Mekong meat grinder at 19, as a corpsman, he unwillingly played God, the teenage arbiter of which Marine had a chance on a chopper and which would fade into the gray. The gloomy decision, his alone to make. Hiding behind dark clouds as an adult, merely for loving whom he loved, marginalized and cowed and penalized by the very country and military he served. And yet today at the Senior Center, He is welcomed. He is valued. He is treasured, all while radiating ultraviolet love. Through trauma that pushes so many into the darkness of despair, my friend Joe pushes forward, honoring the burden he was born with, to be the sunshine no matter the weather.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for sharing the talent of your one of your students.
Well,
All
thank you.
right.
Thanks, Mark.
Nice to meet you.
You too. Keep writing. The first things I was going to ask you was about you being a subversive artist. Do you
Yeah.
do you consider yourself that and why?
Oh, I do. It didn't dawn on me till later that I was. So the why? Well, we'll stick to the poetry because most of it comes through the poetry. Subversion began for me in the politics of Portland in City Hall, where we were fighting, the people, were fighting to have City Council acknowledge all of the deaths that were occurring on the street with our houseless population. And they were refusing to acknowledge it. And at the same time, we were up against a police force in Portland that was notorious for killing young Black people for no crimes. Basically, it was like mercenaries on the streets of Portland. So we couldn't change the subject matter in City Hall because all City Hall wanted to do was allow investors to come build buildings and shoo out the houseless folks on the street, and also at the same time give more money to the police force. So we couldn't get them to acknowledge what we were talking about and make it as at the top of the list agenda item that it needed to be. So they were figuring out ways to shut us down in testimony in city council. And the subversion came in multiple ways, but for me personally, I realized that if I came to make my agenda heard and I came with poetry, they couldn't shut me down by telling me that I wasn't addressing their agenda item because, of course, they had no idea where any particular poem was going. So it enabled me to maintain my 3 minutes of talk time to the city council through poetry on any agenda item because they had no idea what I was going to say. So the act of poetry, the act of writing a poem and presenting it as your statement was impossible to reject from the city councilors because they didn't know where it was going. Its language was a language that no one can know what the next word is going to be. Unlike us communicating just like this right now. Somebody could say to us, well, you two are talking about poetry right now. And the agenda item is actually, how do we fix the bridge, like over the water? And we understand this language, this talk language, this way. But with poetry, I was able to diffuse all of that and say what I wanted to say about houseless deaths and about cops murdering kids. So it began there. And then I was creating poetry on political poetry on pieces of paper that were 7 feet tall by about 4 feet wide. And I was putting them all across Portland on empty buildings that weren't being used for housing anybody. They were just sitting empty. And so I might, glue on those pieces of poems in the public for the public to see, even though I didn't have a permit to do that. So subversively posting poetry around the city on what was private property. So those two things were the most subversive things that I was doing for many years.
Oh,
And yeah, and at one point we had just finished putting poetry up on a vacant building in Northwest Portland, an area of Portland. And a man who came up to me, who he told me he's homeless, and he said to me, I love these poems that are up here. Do you know how they got here? Because it was right after we were finished putting them up. And I said, no, but I think that it's great. And he said, I love this. And I think this should be done all around because this brings light, he said, to my situation. And some of those poems were from this book, Beneath the Gravel Weight of Stars, which was um, a book that I had written about people I knew on the streets of Portland when I was doing my advocacy work for them as a volunteer. So, yeah. So I think that we can use poetry politically in many facets of daily life where it's most unexpected, and we can get somewhere by pushing this art form forward. So because it's a stunning art form, it's something people aren't used to looking at. They might be used to looking at a mural that's visual, but they're not used to looking at huge words that are a poem up on some building that have something pertinent to say about where it is placed.
okay. Very interesting. Kind of brilliant too. Um, I read somewhere that you wrote you were a drifter, a wanderer when you were younger. Were you also houseless at some point?
I wasn't houseless, but I did get myself involved in okay, so I'll start back earlier. I'm from Philadelphia, and most of my friends in the mid 70s were deadheads, and we took off and went on tour, following the Grateful Dead up and down the East Coast, and sometimes a little bit beyond that. Staying in, somebody's car, staying in motel rooms, sharing with all kinds of people just wherever you could crash. But no, I wasn't unhoused. Um, Later, after college, I ended up wandering around Israel by myself for a long time, and that was wonderful. Again, not unhoused. I was found places to sleep and camp and do things like that. Later, I ended up in a relationship with a woman that was a violent relationship. And it was at that time that I was living in a van for a while. But again, not unhoused. I had my van. And it took many years to get out of that relationship and get her arrested. So, but no, but I did love to travel. I did love to wander, but I fortunately never had to have the experience of having to sleep outside unwarranted and unwantingly.
Well, during the time you were a deadhead, is that when you were tripping on LSD fairly frequently?
All the time.
Uh,
All the time. My LSD for me began when I was 15. And LSD was the thing that showed me that everything up until that point that I thought was real, in fact, was real. Because the things that I was seeing before LSD, most people weren't seeing. And so there was like zero validation until I started tripping that what I was feeling was real was in fact something that was real, just not on this particular plane. And I really enjoyed being on that plane where everything was a lot more um, the way that I wanted it to be and the way that I thought it was.
hmm.
Yeah, the different dimensions is what I'm talking about. The different dimensions and different planes of existence is very particular to what I'm saying.
Did the reading the beats influence your striking out on the road on your own and having all these other experiences?
For sure. So let's see. Um, my, I think the first person who really influenced me, it was I was a lot younger, and that was Whitman. I was actually in first grade, and the language of Whitman's poetry in first grade as a writing exercise was something that stayed with me for forever. This language that he had through poetry made sense to me. Again, one of these things that was sort of validated for me when I started doing LSD, that there are these different ways to communicate what we need to communicate and what we want to communicate. But um, I read when I was in 10th grade, I was in a Quaker high school in Philly, and we all had to take a religion class, but it didn't have to be like a straight up religion. And so I took a religion class that incorporated Buddhism and the beats and Zen. So I read in 10th grade on the road, and I read Zen and the art of archery as well as Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, which was also something that made me want to, you know, get going. Um, and between the style of On the Road, um, literally speaking, the stylistically, was something that moved me, but the story moved me tremendously. I wanted to get on the bus, and I felt very much that I'd already stepped onto the bus, and just kept going, you know.
Were you writing poetry during this time you were traveling around?
I was writing poetry and it was terrible, but I really loved it, and that's what mattered to me. And a friend of mine, Josh Goldman, we started a literary magazine in our Quaker high school, and we decided that we would let everybody who wanted to write something for the literary magazine, we would allow it in. And that editing out certain things for us at that time, I was 15 or 16, that we didn't want to edit anyone's expression. So everything was allowed in this literary newspaper of ours, much to the dismay of the director of the school, because we didn't alter language. So, yeah, and I'm very proud of that, actually. My work with Josh, with understanding, beginning to understand that we all have things to say, and sometimes a person can say them in a way that is more precious than the way another person says it, or we might feel it more coming from this person than that person, but everybody's way was to be accepted and heard and felt. So yeah, so we did that. I don't remember what it was called, but yeah, we had that. I remember my father. My father enjoyed writing and writing poetry, and I could tell that he had wished that we would have edited out quite a few things, but
Tell me something about your career in music, and do you still play, at least privately, a guitar or make songs?
I had a career in music for a while, and I grew up playing music, guitar and piano, and then had a band for a long time. And then about 2015, the band ended. I wasn't having fun anymore. So I said, that's that. And then 2 years later, poetry came back. I was writing poetry in college as well. And poetry came back unannounced. And I had no idea that was going to happen. So I was pleased with that I had a new opportunity, and I hadn't been playing music. up until that point after I left it, after I shut my band down. And no, I'm not really playing and I'm not writing songs anymore, although there was a poem a few months ago that came out of me, which was actually a song. And I have the music in my head, but I haven't, I've tried putting it to guitar, but it hasn't happened yet. I don't miss playing music. There are a lot of components to it, and all of the components cost time and money, and poetry's free.
Okay.
Hmm.
Um, I read somewhere that you like to have street noise in your poetry. Like it's an instrument for you. Is that correct? And you have something. Tell me about what it is you have about what instrument was that? A saxophone, was it? There's some instrument that you
It
really
was a trumpet, a
a
trumpet.
trumpet. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So when I was playing music, I had an opportunity to play at the Bitter End in New York City, and we were doing a sound check there. And the sound man asked if I would keep playing a particular song and if he could come up and play trumpet while I was playing. And it was so beautiful, and he had a mute in the trumpet. And ever since then, I have always wanted uh, a trumpet with my poetry. And I found someone in Portland who plays trumpet, and he plays for lots of different people. But we've done some poetry readings together where he plays trumpet as an accompaniment. And I don't know, it's just always something that's felt perfect for my poetry. Um, I forget the other question that you had asked.
I do too. Let's see. What was it? Oh, street noise in your poetry.
Street noise. So there was a time, and it still exists for me, where writing in New York for me is a thing. I go to New York and the energy of New York, the sound of New York, the scent of New York, the smell of New York, um, the feel of concrete in New York, the wind in New York is very different from anywhere else. And all of it is incredibly inspiring to me. And so if I'm in New York, I want to write outside to hear all of that. And here, down in the desert, which is New York's opposite, the sounds here are of birds, of wind, um, and really that's it. You hear birds, you hear wind, and um, you smell rain coming from a distance. You hear thunder when the thunderstorms come in, but everything is about nature here. And the life and death cycle here in the wilderness, which is a very powerful force to work with in writing. In New York, all of the things that I mentioned that go into my poetry from New York are its opposite. It's not the life and death cycle in New York. It's the I'm alive right now in New York for me, you know. And so, yeah, so all of that goes into the writing.
Well, at this point, would you like to read us a poem or two?
Sure. Um, I thought that I haven't read from this book in a long time. My first book, Beneath the Gravel Weight of Stars, which was for my friends who were unhoused at the time on the streets of Portland. Um, Here's one called Unsheltered. I'm just picking one. Unsheltered. We hide here among the grasses and porcupine tellers of four-storied lives. Braided, we thrush, then are shorn. Or is it that we live like shade? Mullein leaves repel the sun. Inside the dandelion dome, seeds rise to reach the mantled prayers. Wind cackles the bones of the dreaded spokes. Unhoused wheels spin on the low cycle. The bourbonous Tuileries of the dirt fairies dance. Sticky pitch, this starlight gaze. At us, the mirror cracks. At us. At us, where is reflection? The avenue of sleepers hardens our shards. Indigent rain on the relic road, we muddy drift deeper down the Mullery's mire. The same moon in the town that shivs the windowless view keeps a lover in the lake for the fisherman's wife. On the lip of luscious insanity, we wither on this sog canal. And I was saying something earlier about the language of poetry. We can fit the language of poetry or create the language of poetry to, in this case for me, be the language of the minds of, in this case, of an unhoused person. The insanity that one feels living in a scared, frightened reality 24/7, especially as a woman. Um, it makes a person lose his or her sanity and being on high alert for 24/7. And so how do we express that in words? Well, this language that we're speaking can't do that. But when we put that into the language of poetry, we can come up with just that medium to express it. So that's why I'm grateful that I was able to write this about the people I knew on the street, because when I read it to them and when they read it, they recognized themselves in it because of the language.
Mm.
Whereas people who don't understand, people who don't talk to folks who are living on the street or, don't have the time or can't take the time or refuse to take the time to get to know somebody living on the street, you don't have that awareness of what life sounds like and what life feels like for folks who are living on the street. And I use the word living, but I should use the word surviving because that's really what it is. It's survival.
Very interesting. Well, it was nice to hear you talk about your poetry and your life. Thank,
Thanks, Belinda.
thank you. Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Bye.